Hey guys!
Hey guys!
It's been a long time.
Yeah, it has.
I've missed you guys. We've been busy. We've been in Florida at a dog professionals conference, the International Association of Canine Professionals. It's
That's a
our
mouthful.
favorite place to be.
Yeah.
It is a mouthful, so we just call it the IACP. But it's a great organization that is just super awesome, friendly, caring, and just chock full of tons of information. So we've been learning about nutrition, holistic care, and herbals, and hot and cold body types for foods with dogs, which is really fascinating to me. We've learned about different training methods, different techniques, just so much. My mind's still processing. And then of course got to see really old friends that we only see once a year at these conferences. So
And then we spent the next week doing what we seem to always do when we're out of town, even though we don't have kids with us. We go to like zoos and stuff. It just seems to be every time we're in a new city, we're like, let's check out the zoo, let's check out the aquarium. So that's basically what we've spent this week doing. Doing some vacationing and checking out different animals all over. We did Busch Gardens, we did the Florida Aquarium and the Florida Zoo, or the Tampa Zoo.
Tampa Lowry Park Zoo.
Yeah, and that kind of got us on our topic today, because we do a lot of the little trainer talks and the behind the scenes
because we don't have kids, so we can do those things.
So just listening to the trainers talk how they interact with their animals, and just kind of thinking about how I think a lot of people do or would interpret how those trainers interact with their animals in the zoos, how that would translate right into their home, and how some things kind of get
Muddled.
Lost in translation, I would say, or a little bit confused, because those are two very, very different worlds.
Right.
So that's kind of been on my mind the past few days, going to all these different places. So we thought that we would talk about that today.
Yeah, so if you have any questions as we're going, or even after this video, feel free to post them in the comments. If you know somebody that this would be appealing to, or they'd be interested in, or would be helpful for them, feel free to share it on your page. We'd like that. But yeah, as far as training methods go, I'm sure we always talk about we're balanced, meaning we're right in the middle. But we'll just do a quick recap here. So as far as training methods go, positive reinforcement is where you only reward or mark positive behaviors. And then for negative behaviors, you ignore them and don't reward them, in hopes that they go away, or they don't happen as often. And that does work for some dogs. That are more mild temperament, the dogs that are just born speaking English, and just you don't really have a lot of really bad behaviors because they're just so awesome. We've not been blessed with any of those dogs yet. I think God knows we're dog trainers, and he gives us the dogs that need a lot of work, but they do exist. And then as far as zoos, that's really all they have, because they can't force a 2-ton animal to do anything. Not that you should force your dog to do anything, but just physically, you can't move a rhinoceros. You can move a dog. You can pick it up and put it on the floor. I mean, it's just simple. And then, the old school method of training that everybody, talks about as being cruel or mean or abusive, which it kind of was the correction-based training, where they corrected all those naughty behaviors that dogs do, and stopped them right away, which was great, but they didn't praise anything good that the dogs did, and their corrections were not always clear to the dog, and so they were just more harmful than beneficial. And so when we talk about being balanced in the middle, I always joke that we train dogs like we raise our kids. If they're doing something wrong, we're going to interrupt or correct that behavior. And a correction should be something that gets their attention, not something that they're afraid of. So for me, getting a speeding ticket, I don't like it, but I'm not like terrified of it. I'm not like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. Like, there's no fear in that regard, but there is this guilt of, uh-oh, I did something wrong and I know it, and there's a consequence, right? That's a correction. And it's to get me back on the right course. And so when we talk about, balanced training, raising our our kids as we train dogs is if they're making a bad choice, we're going to stop or correct that behavior. There's always consequences for our actions, and then we're going to immediately redirect them and show them what they should have done instead. And so dogs and kids, they're not the same, but dogs do have the average IQ of a toddler. So if you think about raising toddlers, they're irrational, they don't remember things easily, but if you're consistent enough, they start to get the idea of it. And that's what we can accomplish with dogs. They're not perfect, they're not flawless, but they can start to get the idea of a right choice with consistent consequences to negative actions and consistent reinforcement, positive reinforcement to those positive actions. So when we go to zoos, you'll hear them often say they use positive reinforcement. And positive reinforcement training with dogs actually originated in the zoos. That's where we got the idea from. And then we brought it to the dog world. And it definitely has its merits, and we definitely do a lot of positive reinforcement because it's super important to mark and reward positive actions, just like with us humans. If I do a good job training dogs, guess what? I get a referral. Nothing makes me happier than that. If I don't do a good job, often I would be told, I hope, to my face, so that I can make improvements, right? That's a correction, like, uh-oh, I did something wrong. How can I make it better? We're always learning. And the same with dogs.
And like we talk about, like with kids all the time, if our kids did something really good and we didn't acknowledge that at all, they probably wouldn't continue to do that on a regular basis. And that's why we need to reinforce those positive behaviors.
Yep, and then kids are more likely to do negative behaviors because they are going to elicit a response, albeit a negative response and probably a rash and an unkind response. But some kids, that's the only attention they get. And some dogs, that's the only attention they get because the humans just don't know how to speak dog in a way that makes the dogs feel like they're getting the attention they need without acting like a doofus. So at the zoo, positive reinforcement. What is it? How does it work? So at the zoo, obviously they do lots of shows. That's how they get people to be wowed and want to send their money to the zoos and come back and spend more money, which helps animals, right? So training is super important to the well-being of several endangered species specifically, that otherwise we would just go to the zoo, see a rhino standing there not doing anything, and be like, okay, that's boring, I don't really want to come back, I've seen the rhino, that's it. But when they do shows, when they do presentations, and they actually have that rhino perform a task on command, we're like wowed by it, and we're like, I would definitely pay money to see that again. So positive reinforcement also has a lot of medical benefits in the zoo world because medical procedures can be stressful for humans and animals, and without proper understanding, without proper practice, the zoos went through a lot of trouble to anesthetize or have an animal go under an anesthetic or an anesthesia so that they could perform a simple medical procedure like drawing blood or just doing an annual exam or a routine exam. But with positive reinforcement, they can mark specific behaviors, reward it, so that the animals get conditioned to those actions like drawing blood or standing still for their exam and knowing in their mind what's happening, and it's not scary, versus just if you were to walk up to somebody who doesn't speak your language and they start fondling you all over, you're probably going to be a bit taken aback and maybe a little afraid. That's normal. But if that person speaks your language and says, hey, something doesn't look right, I'm just going to go ahead and do this little exam, I'm a medical professional, everything's fine, you're going to feel more comfortable about this because you've been touched by a medical professional before. They've looked in your ears before, they've looked in your eyes before. It's not as scary. So the zoos, that works really well for them, but they don't, the animals have the choice and positive reinforcement. They can choose to perform the task and get a big reward, or they can choose not to. And the zoos can't make them, and they don't want to make them because they're wild animals. They want them to have that choice to say, I'm not feeling it, I'm going to go away. And I think that's super important with our dogs too, to an extent. If your dog is making good choices in life and he doesn't have any negative impacts to other animals or humans, that's probably okay for the rest of your dog's life. But if your dog does make some bad choices, like jumping on people, for some dogs that can be a big deal. It can be really harmful to smaller children or elderly that maybe have more frail skin. Even though that dog wasn't jumping out of aggression, he has claws, he may have some size to him. Even if he's a little dog, he could actually scratch the skin of an elderly person who's on like a blood thinner and make them bleed. Was that mean to stop talking or just pause? Okay. And so that can be a bad thing. You know, if your dog has any reactivity or aggression, super bad thing, you know, towards other dogs or animals. We don't want any animal to be harmed by, or person to be harmed by an animal. So just ignoring those behaviors isn't going to make it go away, and preventing those behaviors isn't fixing it. It's not helping your dog's mental state, because they're still in that frantic state of mind where they feel like they have to be anxious and aroused and crazy, versus you know, if we could just communicate to them like, hey, that's not allowed, knock it off. Hey, come sit over here and I'll give you a big treat. Oh, well, they just got what they wanted, right? Attention, but they got it in a respectful way. And so when people come, that same mental process that would make them go spastic is now like, ooh, you know what? If I jump and act like a fool, I don't get any reward. But if I go sit over here and look cute, I get lots of rewards and attentions. And that's the difference between a zoo animal and a canine or a dog in your house. Because if you've spoken to anybody who's actually trained animals in the zoo, it sounds like a wonderful job, something I always wanted to do as a child. But after speaking to some friends that are actually members of the IACP and others, I found that I'm actually quite glad I've never been put in that position, because it can be life or death sometimes. It's not always just training and smiles and glamorous things. If a rhino's mad at you and charges you, you're screwed. If a sea lion decides that you're a jerk and bites you, that could be like a huge, like you could be forever scarred or not have full use of your limbs. I mean, that can be life or death. So those animals, those zookeepers, they don't live with those animals. They don't have them sleeping on their couch or in their bed with them, because they know that those are wild animals and they have deadly instincts. Yeah, not that they're bad animals, but they have deadly instincts.
Yeah, a lot of the animals, even the ones that they talk about training, they won't share space with them at all. Mm-hmm. Not only do they not share space like you share space with your dog in your home and in your room and, you know, in close quarters and sitting next to, they won't share space at all, because even though they can communicate with these animals and they can get them to do certain tasks, they know that the animal it's a totally wild animal, and not only are they not domesticated, you know, there's a difference between a domesticated animal and a tame animal. And a lot of these zoo animals are not even tame. They're really, like, they can get them to come over to a certain area for food, but they're not like a hippo. They're not going to go into the hippo's habitat.
Never.
Ever. Because even though the hippo knows when it's lunchtime or they can come over.
Even though it's a vegetarian.
Right. They're not going to go into that hippo's space, because it could be life-threatening. And not only those animals that they won't share space with at all, but like Crystal was mentioning, like sea lions, like that do shows, mm-hmm. They have attacked people during shows, like
or during training.
So,
mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a totally different world that you always have to be cautious.
Yes, they never relax around those animals. They're always working.
Always
they're always attentive. They're always watching. Where we're not like that with our dogs, because we live with them.
Or we don't want to be, and we shouldn't have to be. And that's what part of what comes along with having an animal that's been domesticated for thousands of years, mm-hmm. thousands of generations.
But even though it's domesticated, it still has wild. We have wild instincts, right? Like if somebody's threatening my kids, I will hurt you. Like that's an instinct. That's a maternal instinct for me to have that, like life or death. If there's a threat to my kids, I'm gonna threaten you. The same is true for dogs, but for more things than just like kids. It could be over furniture. Hey, this is my territory, and if you're gonna encroach on my territory, I'm gonna bite you. They're still wild animals, and they still have wild instincts, even though they've been domesticated thousands of years. And that's why dogs do bad things. They're not perfect. They're a dog. That's what they're supposed to do when it makes sense to them in their natural, native, environment. But in our house, the rules are a little different, right? You can't just pee on a couch and call it yours. It's not that easy, unfortunately. And so comparing, zoo animals to the domestic dog, there's a lot of differences there. And I don't think it's fair to say that you can live with a dog with behavioral problems and be on guard 24/7.
Right.
That's just not fair.
That's not a healthy lifestyle for you or your dog.
We recommend it and we encourage it and we try to do this, but we're humans, right? We can't. We cannot watch a dog 100% of the time. So there has to be some learning involved that may not always be positive, right? Like, I'm not saying that it's okay to go hurt your dog. Like, that's absolutely not okay. But if your dog is doing something negative, you need to interrupt that dog's thought process in that moment. What interrupts your dog's thought process? It could be a no for those dogs that are super easy. We don't see many of those. It could be like a no and a clap of your hands. It could be no, you know, the air cans that you use to clean your computer keyboard. I always call them correction enhancers. They just need to enhance your no to get your dog's attention. That's all we need is your dog's attention. And so, spraying that little air can down at your side, not at your dog, but just down at your side so it makes that psh sound as you say no. Your dog's gonna be like, what was that? And that's your chance to say, hey, thanks for noticing me. Can you stop jumping on my guests? That's rude. And by the way, if you sit here, oh, look, now you get a treat. Look at that. And your dog can be just as stubborn about sitting to get that treat as he was about jumping to get that attention. Mm-hmm. And so that's one example. Another one would be like, let's say your dog is aggressive on the walks and he's lunging at other dogs or people. So a correction could be a tug of the leash back. So if the dog's already pulling and you're pulling one way, that's not a tug. But a tug is that give of pressure and then the pulling that pressure back to say, hey, I'm talking to you. It's almost like, hey, stop acting like a jerk, like that almost like a violent shake, right? Like, not like, hey, when Eric's like screaming at somebody, that's not gonna get his attention, but I'm like, hey, right? That gets his attention. That's something that you can do with your dogs. Not hitting them, not kicking them, but just getting their attention. Because that's all we want is their attention so we can show them a better way. There's always a better way. So yeah, that's kind of the differences between the domestic dog that's still a wild animal that has wild instincts. It's a domestic animal with wild instincts. Yeah,
and I thought it was important for us to talk about this because I do hear people occasionally comparing these two totally mm-hmm. different worlds and totally different relationships and scenarios. And just because the zoos do this, we should mm-hmm. do this with dogs. Mm-hmm. And yes, but there's a lot more to it. We have a higher expectation for our dogs because we are sharing space with them, we are living with them, and also we have a very, very different relationship with our dogs mm-hmm. Than we do with the zoo animals and even the handlers. So definitely wanted to give a fuller picture to that because I think some people kind of confuse those two worlds and mm-hmm. just kind of give our thoughts on that. But yeah, I think you did great kind of covering everything, Chris.
I do want to add one more thing. Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I did forget to mention too with the training of zoo animals versus domestic dogs. Zookeepers, animal trainers, that's their full-time job. They go and work those animals every day. And so we don't necessarily work our dogs every day with training. I mean, you should definitely exercise your dog and stuff, and that's super important, but that's not the same as training. And so you shouldn't have to spend every day for the rest of your life training a dog. You shouldn't have to. But zookeepers do, because that's super important to that animal's health and well-being, because it's the only form of communication they have with those animals. Whereas the domestic dog, it's bred to be domestic to humans. It has this innate relationship with us where it wants to follow us. And once we bridge that communication gap and teach them a few things to strengthen that relationship and that communication, you don't have to spend the rest of your life teaching the dog, right? Because you already have that. You just maintain that relationship. And so that's something I just want to throw that in there too. That's a little different than zoo and animal trainer relationships versus a dog and dog owner relationship. Yeah. Which if you're a dog owner, you should be a dog trainer. Just like if you're a parent, you should be a teacher. Yeah. Yeah, so even if we're not doing dedicated training lessons, our dogs are always learning. Mm-hmm. So you're always teaching. Keep that in mind. Cool. I think that's it. We'll try and keep it under 20 minutes today. If you liked this video, go ahead and click the little 3 dots up in the top of your right corner screen. Habla, 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 habla. Which is probably the other way because it's in it backwards on Facebook. Like it does like a mirror. Like...
If you got 3 dots, click them, and you can subscribe to our Facebook Lives specifically, so that you get a notification when we go live. Share this with your friends, tag your friends, whatever. Bada bada bing.
Bada
What do you
bada
got to
boom.
say?
Out.
All right. See you guys.
See you guys.